We all think we know who the dangerous people in our lives are. The loud ones, the angry ones, the obvious manipulators. But Jung's work forces us to consider something darker. What if the real danger isn't in the people who scream at us, but in the ones who smile? What if the people who quietly drain our energy are more destructive than the ones who show their claws? It's not easy to face, because many of these people are not strangers. They can be family, partners, colleagues, even friends. And sometimes, the person we need to watch most closely is the one in the mirror. Jung devoted his life to studying the hidden structures of the psyche. He knew that most of what governs human behavior is not conscious at all. And that's where the danger lies. Because someone who is unaware of their own shadow doesn't simply bury it, they hand it to the people closest to them. They live through others without even realizing it. Think about those times you left a conversation feeling strangely drained, like you were carrying emotions you didn't even walk in with. Or the times you found yourself apologizing for something you weren't even guilty of. Or when you walked away, doubting yourself, because someone else's narrative felt more convincing than your own. That's not just stress. That's unconscious psychology at work. And if you don't recognize the pattern, you can spend years living under someone else's shadow. Jung pointed to 5 particular ways this danger shows up in people. They aren't villains in the usual sense. Most of them have no idea what they're doing. But ignorance of the unconscious doesn't make someone harmless. It makes them unpredictable. The first kind is the manipulator, who doesn't even know they're manipulating. They come across as fragile, intense, even soulful. At first, it feels like a privilege to be close to them. You think you can help them, heal them, make a difference. But slowly, you realize something isn't right. Every time they feel anger, it's somehow your fault. Every time they feel rejected, you're to blame. Every time they collapse, you're expected to catch them. And if you try to step back, you're accused of betrayal. Jung called this projection. When someone can't face their own feelings, they project them outward. Instead of carrying their own pain, they make you carry it. And you start to wonder if you really are insensitive, if you really are the problem. That self-doubt is how the trap closes. You begin to live in their story instead of your own. The second kind of danger is quieter. These are the people who live behind a mask. Always polite, always proper, always controlled. At first, it looks admirable. They're the ones who never lose their temper, who always say the right thing, who seem to glide through life without drama. But there's something missing. Talk to them long enough, and you feel it, the hollowness, the rehearsed answers, the way your own spontaneity starts to shrink in their presence. Jung called this the persona, the social mask we all wear to play our roles. We all need one. But when someone believes they are only their mask, they become artificial. And the danger is that the people around them start to wear masks too. It becomes contagious. You begin to police your own emotions. You avoid saying what feels real. And slowly, the relationship becomes a performance instead of a meeting of souls. But repression has a cost, and that cost appears in the third type. These are the people who deny their own shadow. They try to live as if envy, anger, and desire don't exist inside them. They bury everything messy, everything human, deep in the basement of their psyche. On the surface, they seem balanced, admirable, even disciplined. But repression never holds forever. The shadow leaks out. You'll notice it in the sharp criticism that cuts deeper than it should, in the moral superiority that feels suffocating, in the sudden explosions that seem to come from nowhere. Living with them feels like walking on a minefield. They rarely show what's underneath, but when it finally bursts out, it can be devastating. And the cruelest part? The shadow isn't only made of bad things. It also holds creativity, vitality, passion, hidden potential. But when all of that is denied, it turns into poison. And that poison spreads to anyone close to them. From here, things take a moral turn. Because the fourth kind of danger is the one who tries to control through guilt. The moral controller. You've probably met them. They don't shout, they judge. They don't command, they preach. They speak as if they're trying to save you, but what they're really doing is projecting their own shadow onto you. They condemn selfishness in others while quietly manipulating to get what they want. They shame desire in others while hiding their own hunger. They point fingers, but never turn inward. And because they believe their words are moral, they think they're helping. They believe their judgment is righteous, which makes them even more dangerous because they can hurt you while convinced they're doing good. If you've ever lived under the gaze of a moral controller, you know the feeling. That constant guilt, that shrinking sense of being wrong, even when you've done nothing wrong, that heavy atmosphere of judgment. Jung saw this as one of the greatest threats to individuation, because when morality is used as a mask, truth is nowhere to be found. And finally, there is the most volatile kind of danger, the person driven by unconscious complexes. They don't live in the present moment. They live in fragments of the past that burst through without warning. One day they're loving, affectionate, generous. The next, they explode with accusations you don't understand. You make a small joke, and suddenly they react as if you've betrayed them. You forget to call, and suddenly they treat you like you've abandoned them. Jung described complexes as little fragments of the psyche, autonomous bundles of memory and emotion that can hijack consciousness in an instant. And that's what makes these people so confusing. Because after the storm, they can return to tenderness. And you hold on to those moments of tenderness as proof that the chaos isn't real. But it is real. And until those complexes are made conscious, the storm will always return. Living close to them feels like emotional whiplash. You never know which version of them you'll meet. And slowly, you start walking on eggshells, editing yourself to avoid waking the storm, until you no longer recognize yourself. These, Jung warned us, are the 5 most dangerous kinds of people. Not because they are evil, but because they are unconscious. And the most sobering part? We all carry these patterns within us. At times, we all manipulate without knowing it. We all wear masks. We all deny parts of ourselves. We all moralize to cover our fears. We all get hijacked by old wounds. The danger isn't only out there, it's in here. And the work of seeing it, in ourselves and in others, is what makes freedom possible. Next, we'll look at what happens when you don't see these patterns, the traps people fall into, the illusions they live by, and the practical ways you can stop being a hostage to someone else's unconscious. Because knowing the theory is one thing, living it is another. And the real question is this: how do you keep your soul intact in a world full of unconscious danger? You've probably noticed it by now. The truly dangerous patterns don't start with explosions. They start with small shifts, tiny compromises you make without realizing, moments where you bend just a little until bending becomes your default way of being. That's how danger spreads. Not with a roar, but with a whisper. Take the manipulator. At first, you just listen. They're in pain, and you're compassionate. But compassion slowly becomes obligation. And obligation slowly becomes identity. You wake up one day and realize you've become their caretaker. their emotional container, their shield against their own unconscious. Or the mask bearer. You begin by respecting their need for harmony, no need to rock the boat. But soon, you're editing yourself. Your laughter feels too loud. Your sadness feels inappropriate. Your anger feels like a crime. And without ever deciding, you've started performing too. The shadow denier pulls you in differently. Around them, intensity feels dangerous, so you tone yourself down. You laugh softer. You confess less. You hide the parts of yourself that feel too much. Until one day, you notice you've silenced your own aliveness, just to be tolerated in their presence. The moral controller is even trickier. You start by respecting their standards. It feels safe to follow the rules. But their judgment seeps in like smoke. Suddenly you feel guilty for resting, selfish for saying no, shameful for enjoying something they disapprove of, and before you know it, you're not living your own life anymore. You're living in their court of law, forever on trial. And then there's the complex-driven person. With them, it's not the rules that catch you. It's the cycle of tenderness and chaos. They can be so loving, so genuine, so magnetic. And then, without warning, the storm hits. You feel attacked, confused, blamed. But once the storm passes, they return to warmth. And you cling to that warmth as proof that the storm isn't real. But it is real. It always returns. And the longer you stay, the more your nervous system adapts to chaos as if it were normal. This is the real danger Jung was pointing to. Not just that these people exist, but that we adapt to them. We give up pieces of ourselves to survive their unconsciousness. So the question becomes, how do you resist the pull? How do you stop losing yourself while staying human, compassionate, and open? The first step is awareness. And awareness always begins in the body. Think about the last time you walked away from someone feeling strangely heavy, confused, or guilty for no clear reason. That weight wasn't an accident. Your body was signaling that you were carrying something not yours. The nervous system is faster than thought. It knows when you've absorbed someone else's projection. It knows when you've walked into a mask too tight for breathing. It knows when the shadow in the room isn't your own. So the practice is simple, but not easy. Whenever you feel that weight, pause. Ask yourself, is this mine? If the answer is no, let it drop. Not in anger, not in confrontation, just in refusal. You don't have to carry what isn't yours. And every time you put down what belongs to someone else, you get lighter, stronger, more yourself. The second step is imperfection. Masks thrive on performance. They suffocate in the presence of raw honesty. So offer small doses of imperfection. Admit when you don't know. Laugh at the wrong time. Say the thing that feels messy. Notice how the mask bearer reacts. Some will retreat because reality threatens their role. But some will soften because your authenticity gives them permission to drop their own mask for a moment. Either way, you've protected your own reality. The third step is shadow integration. When you feel anger, don't push it down. Name it. When envy shows up, don't disguise it as advice. Own it. When desire surfaces, don't bury it under guilt. Listen to what it wants to teach you. This isn't indulgence. It's honesty. And what you make conscious can no longer poison you from the dark. The fourth step is boundaries, especially with moral controllers. They will test you with guilt. They will bait you with righteousness. They will insist you explain yourself. Don't. Replace explanations with clarity. I don't see it that way. I won't take that on. I'm not available for that. Short, firm, without defense. You'll feel the pull to justify yourself, to win their approval. Resist it, because every explanation is a leash they tighten, and the final step is reality anchoring. With the complex-driven person, storms are inevitable. You can't always stop them, but you can anchor yourself in truth. When the accusations fly, when the rage erupts, remind yourself, this is not about me. This is their past breaking into the present. It doesn't excuse the harm. It doesn't mean you should stay, but it keeps you from absorbing their ghosts as if they were your own. All of this requires courage, because resisting these unconscious pulls means breaking familiar patterns. It means risking rejection. It means losing people who only knew how to love you when you were smaller than yourself. But the cost of not doing it is far higher. If you keep bending, you lose your shape. If you keep performing, you forget who you are. If you keep carrying projections, you collapse under a weight that was never yours. Jung said, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will meet as fate." That isn't just about others. It's about us. Every time you ignore your own shadow, you risk becoming the very danger you fear. Every time you cling to a mask, you risk suffocating your own soul. Every time you judge instead of reflect, you become the moral controller. Every time you let the past steer your present, you become the complex-driven person. That's why this work matters. Not just to protect yourself from others, but to protect others from you. So let me leave you with a question tonight. Which of these patterns feels uncomfortably close to home? Not in someone else, but in you. Because the real path out of danger doesn't begin by pointing fingers. It begins when you admit the shadow isn't only out there. It lives inside. And facing it is the most radical form of freedom you'll ever know. Think back to a time when someone's presence changed the air around you. Not with shouting, not with violence, but with something subtler. A heaviness, a pressure, an atmosphere that bent you without you realizing it. That's how the unconscious works. It doesn't storm through the front door. It seeps in through cracks. And before you know it, you're carrying something that isn't yours. Let me give you an image. A woman once described her father to me. He was never cruel, never violent, never overtly unkind, but he was a man of masks. In public, he was respected, admired, untouchable. At home, there was no warmth, only silence, only the performance of a perfect family. Even when everyone was suffering inside, she grew up learning to hide her tears, to smile when she was breaking, to perform instead of reveal. And by the time she was an adult, she didn't even know who she was without a mask. This is the legacy of the mask bearer. Not always destruction that screams. Sometimes it's the slow suffocation of authenticity, the quiet teaching that truth is dangerous. And she realized only later in life that the most dangerous part wasn't what her father did. It was what she had learned to do to herself. Now picture another story. A man spoke about a relationship he once had. At first, she was tender, affectionate, full of warmth. Then the storms began. Accusations that came out of nowhere. Explosions over the smallest things. Silence that lasted for days, but in between the chaos, she would return to kindness. And he held on to those moments as proof that the storms weren't real. He told himself she was just going through something. He told himself he could help her heal. He told himself the good moments were the real her. And slowly, he stopped noticing how much of himself he had lost. He no longer spoke freely. He no longer laughed easily. He tiptoed through his own home, as if living in a museum where everything could break at any moment. That is the mark of the complex-driven person. Unfinished wounds that hijack the present. And the cost isn't just their chaos, it's the way you start to treat chaos as normal. Jung warned us about this again and again. The unconscious is not neutral. When ignored, it acts out. And the people closest always pay the highest price. But here's the turning point. It's not enough to name the danger. You have to ask, what now? How do you live in a world full of projections, masks, shadows, moral cages, and complexes without letting them swallow you? The first answer is boundaries. Not sharp, angry walls, but quiet, steady lines that protect your soul. The woman who grew up with a mask-bearing father began practicing imperfection. She would tell the truth, even when it made people uncomfortable. She cried openly for the first time in years. She admitted when she didn't know the answer. And though some people pulled away, the ones who stayed became the first real relationships of her life. The man with the storm-filled partner finally realized he couldn't be both caretaker and lover. He left. And in the silence that followed, he had to face his own shadow, the part of him that felt at home in chaos, the part that mistook instability for passion. It was painful. But he told me later, leaving wasn't just leaving her. It was leaving the version of me that thought I had to earn love by surviving storms. This is what transformation looks like. Not always dramatic. Sometimes it's one decision, one boundary, one act of refusing to carry what isn't yours. And here's the paradox. The moment you start putting down those burdens, you realize how heavy you've been all along. You realize that for years, you've been holding ghosts. And once you see that, you can never go back. Jung often said, the shadow must be faced, not destroyed. And that's the heart of it. The 5 most dangerous people aren't monsters to be eliminated. They are warnings. They show us what happens when the unconscious goes unexamined, because the manipulator is just someone who never learned to hold their own pain. The mask bearer is someone terrified of being seen. The shadow denier is someone afraid of their own aliveness. The moral controller is someone hiding their hunger behind rules. The complex-driven person is someone whose wounds were never given light. And if we're honest, we can find each of them in ourselves. So maybe the real work isn't to exile these people from our lives, but to notice when their reflection stares back at us, to admit when we are the manipulator, when we are the mask bearer, when we are the denier, the controller, the wounded one lashing out, because in the end, the unconscious isn't just a danger, it's also a doorway. And every shadow you face is a step closer to wholeness. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Which of these 5 patterns lives most strongly in you right now? Not in the people around you, in you. Because the moment you answer honestly, you step out of fate and into freedom. And maybe that's what Jung wanted most of all, for us to stop living as hosts for each other's unconscious and start living as whole beings, awake to ourselves and no longer dangerous in the dark.